Hey everybody, I'm Ahmed,
I'm Harrison Talion.
and this is Bottom Line Design. So today we've got a pretty awesome guest on the show. Is a friend of Harrison's from RISD actually. His name is Kyle DeHovitz, and he's an SF-based designer who is particularly passionate about health and wellness. He's equal parts kind and talented, and his resume reads like the logo banner of the buzziest startup you've ever heard of, right? That it's like we've got Google, Facebook, if this then that, Uber. I think at Uber you're working on the safety features, right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. When I started there in 2015.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, and you also worked at Apple.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, like talk about logos, right? And yeah, you
It's like
worked
the
on
ultimate trust band.
yeah, literally. Yeah, must be right. Um, so yeah, you worked on Heartline, Asthma Digital Study, Luma Health, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All those projects were sort of done at Apple well, I don't know if I should dive in, but they're all done as like, part of this health and wellness sort of multi-initiative approach that Apple takes to things. And it is, it was obviously a huge opportunity to work on all those.
We're definitely going to be diving into that, but there's just more of your resume to get through. That's the challenge, right? Is like we 2000.
Yeah.
uh, you joined Carbon Health, right? To improve patient experiences on web and mobile. So really, like health has been a
Yep.
very powerful through line throughout a lot of your work. Obviously, widely celebrated designer. You studied at RISD and Brown in like the dual enrolled program, right? Amazing.
No. I wish it was maybe we should backtrack here, but like, no, I was just sort of taking English side studies at Brown. So
Oh, you studied English like at Brown?
yeah, but like as a like dual, not a dual enrollment, dual degree program. It was like uh, you just like took the classes there.
Right, right. And okay, this is kind of a fun fact also is that like you among like RISD students were sort of like living in the future at the time that your work on if this then that was like a huge inspiration for you to get into product design, right?
Yeah, and so just for context, like Kyle was in the year ahead of me, and I was I was at that time just working on mom and pop websites using Wix. Like Photoshop was still the preeminent tool for UI UX.
Mm-hmm.
What is this new field? And then Sketch hadn't even come out yet, but I was following very, very closely without you knowing. So technically, it's stalking, and I was just watching like everything that you were doing there, because you were a little you shared some of that work a little bit more freely than some of your top secret work that you do now. So another thing that I want to bring up just before we dive into it is the the AFib stuff that you worked on at Apple towards that study. Just a small like personal story, but my dad, recently within the past couple of years passed away from pancreatic cancer, and the way that we discovered that was I put on my Apple Watch on his wrist just to see what his heart rate was like because I noticed his gait was a little off. He was like, so I'm like, first question, like, what's going on with your heart? How healthy is your heart? And the watch immediately said, contact your call emergency services or contact your doctor. And I'm getting like goosebumps and a little emotional talking about it just because like anyone that had a part in notifying my dad so I can spend more time with him just gets my heart. So with that, let's dive into it.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that would actually be a natural point to start is like let's like hear whatever of the story you're able to tell
Yeah.
of like the health and wellness initiatives that Apple rolled out and the way that design contributed to them.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, Harrison, that's like a very like impactful story, and I'm sorry for that. I lost my mom in 2010, so I can empathize that that's loss like that can be quite jarring. No kid should have to go through that. But um I wanted to sort of just, I guess just start with that. But when I think about talking about health at Apple, and I certainly have to be a little bit reserved in what I'm talking about. What I felt is such a what like drew me towards it, besides it being such an like important part about like making an impact on people's lives, was doing these things responsibly. And health and tech has a huge responsibility to approach things carefully and sort of like in clear communication as much as possible. So when you mentioned the messaging that one gets for when they receive an AFib alert, that is not just sort of copy that's handed off to one or two people. It's really thought about by everybody, by designers, by like engineers, like how truthful it is and how actionable it is. And when I was working on the Heartline study, which used the AFib monitor on the Apple Watch, that was a study that was designed to help seniors understand what their risk for AFib might be, or rather, like how we could communicate what AFib is and what you should do in the event that your Apple Watch alerts you to an irregular rhythm. And there's so much in there that was really tough to, or really an amazing challenge, but like to go into where you're teaching people about using a product, not just like, okay, put on an Apple Watch and turn on these features, but how to actually navigate this ecosystem. Apple, has a beautiful ecosystem, but there's still this ecosystem of the health app. There's the certainly the hardware, and then the Heartline study, which was kind of the guide and the shepherd throughout that experience, and doing this in a way that told the story and sort of held the hand of someone experiencing an irregular rhythm notification, who might not understand the broader complexities of tech ecosystems, right? They might not know what HealthKit is. They might have had a grandchild or someone set up their Apple Watch for them. So
Yeah.
that kind of goes back to this feeling, and I'll stop rambling in a second, of like doing things responsibly and thoughtfully, and not making declarations of you have AFib or you're having a regular rhythm notification, right? It's being very like considerate and sort of all ways to approach things. So yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and like first off, feel free to ramble here. This is a
Yeah.
rambling safe place.
I'm good at
The
that.
how did you feel? Did you feel like you had to play the designers at Apple are so thoughtful. You yourself, just from like when I was, at RISD, your peers talked about you quite highly, even back in the day, as someone that's thoughtful. Did you find that you had to play catch up when you got to that space, or was it something that was just a natural fit? And in what ways did you have to play catch up if you did?
Hmm. Um, I mean, absolutely. I had to play catch up. And till the day I left, and still am. I mean, it was easily the most formative design experience of my life. One that I would love to continue someday, frankly, because it's not just there's a design team and they're really good at what they do. Um, it's not just, oh, the Apple, the design team. And in fact, I'll sort of avoid any kind of more commentary on that side of things. But I personally, for me, it was about the bar was so high, but it was something like in the air or in the water at Apple, where everybody thought about it in that way. It wasn't you just designed something and handed it over, and your sketch file was great. Every conversation I had with copywriters was it was a conversation, it was a collaboration. And so my catching up really had to do with like, hey, it's okay at Apple to be engaging with all of these, to be engaging with like, the legal teams about like why a design matters or how it should be sort of approached. I mean, for me, it was like a breath of fresh air, almost similar to being at RISD, where you're surrounded by so many talented, passionate people, where everybody was like, still is like cares about making the best possible product experience. So it's like yeah, you don't always, if you always are trying to like level yourselves up because everyone else there is like they're leveling themselves up at the same time, if that makes sense, right? It's not like everyone's at this bar and you have to meet it. It's just sort of the like the values and is that everybody's kind of constantly trying to improve and to just make the best things. Yeah.
I'm curious about like these environments that are like really sort of radical and intense like this can be really difficult to understand from the people who haven't been through them, right? Like it's like very clear like how formative and important this experience was for you. One of the ways that I found can be like really a powerful way of communicating what like a vibe was like for someone who wasn't there is like a little detail, right? Of like something that like really speaks to what those values were. Like I don't know if there's anything you can talk about of like something that you saw at Apple where you were like, whoa, okay, this is this is a clear indication that the only way a detail like this would ever come up is if like everybody cared about design as much as they do.
Such as the fork
Yeah.
prongs, yes, a squircle or
Oh,
squircle.
sure,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
kidding. I don't know if that's the case, but
yeah. Maybe something in the culture.
yeah, definitely towards the culture.
Um, I mean, I think I could speak all about, Apple Park and all these beautiful things and the culture there, but it's funny that I was at Apple at the time and it actually struck me as something that was at one of the Apple stores. And it was, in the public view. And, I was actually going downtown to just, I don't know, I think just check out the Apple store. And, it was a holiday. There was, I can't remember the exact one. It might have been like Lunar New Year Festival, something downtown. And Apple stores have the hours of the store, in a nice graphic sort of out front of some of the stores.
Yeah.
And I noticed once that I walked by and they had changed, not like put up a temporary sign saying we'll be closed or something on this day or our hours are changed. They had actually changed the signs itself to reflect the holiday that was coming up, right? It wasn't just like Monday through Friday, 9 to 10 or whatever, or you know what I'm saying? It was like they had made such an insignificant, small, detailed change to the outside signage that you wouldn't even know that it was especially for a holiday. And I remember just like that was one of those things where it was like I would never have even thought about it doing it that way. And that somebody did and actually went through the effort to do it in a high quality way was like astounding to me. I mean, really, it's such a small detail to your point, but I think it exactly gets to just that. It's like the joie de vivre or whatever of Apple. Just this something that makes it so special.
Yeah.
I love that. Actually, that reminds me of
Yeah.
is on the Disney cruise. I think it was Disney that pioneered this small like niche experience. But when you walk into any one of their elevators, in stone, it says "Good morning" between the hours of like midnight and noon.
What?
Then it changes to "Good afternoon" from 12 to 4, and then from 4 on it says "Good night." And I think actually at around midnight for 1 hour it says "Get to bed." So. And then I like those little small details, but that reminded me of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
So, like, what was what was the journey? I mean, getting to Apple and like working on their health initiatives. Was that the first design work that you had done in the health space? Did you know that that's what you wanted to be working on? Like, how did you start this sort of chapter of your career?
Yeah, for sure. So, uh, my approach to Apple, this is going to sound like such a jerky thing to say. It was like I wanted to work on an important. I had like two kind of objectives. Like one to like work on an important thing at Apple. I didn't actually care so much as to what. I just something that was like impactful. And two, I kind of wanted them to like someone to reach out to me to like try to connect with me because in a way I think personally I was thinking about that as like a marker of my own success of like, hey, I'm in a league where people now actually want to reach out to me and like are asking for, they're sort of pulling for my insight rather than I'm pushing my insight onto somebody else, which we've all been there, right? Like you're just trying to push your work and really get in the door. And, um, it just came down to just knowing somebody actually I'd interviewed with prior, and she was starting a team, and she just felt would be a good match, and it kind of kicked off from there. But it, I think what helped me in that goal and that mindset was that it helped me like approach all the other work that I did at, IFT and Uber with like a mindset of just like trying to do important things and like make high quality products, like always thinking about like my work as like a portfolio piece. I still think that way today. Like everything I do is a portfolio piece. And so, even at Uber, what was important for me was, I think there were really exciting teams at Uber, like the driver experience, the rider experience. Um, but I was happy when I got put on the safety team because it was exactly that sort of impactful area that, you could start to create some sort of like really, yes, like good looking work, but also at the same time, work that is affecting people's lives in a positive way. And there was some cool technology stuff thrown in there where I worked on self-driving team for a little while and Uber Maps, which was pretty exciting. But yeah, it was just like kind of this mindset, and that sort of brought me to where I was when I came into Apple, and I felt ready really when I went in that way.
Yeah.
How do you
Mm.
kind of go on a trip here, but how do you deal with imposter syndrome? When you're
Yeah.
when you're going, and we can, it's not necessarily in the vein of Apple, because like obviously you have such a rich history in like other places, but like when you go to a high performance place, like how is it that you deal with imposter syndrome when you yourself know in your brightest moments you're totally made for it?
That's really nice. I don't deal with it well. I'm a generally like anxious person, and so there's always this period of like you join a new firm and you're kind of like you sort of like oh God, why am I here? Always trying to sort of I don't know. It can be kind of a hectic mess thing, but my approach to it really is to pause and take my time. It comes from like fostering trust in the people who hired me, right? And through that process of interviewing and kind of coming somewhere, I always think about like who I'm talking to, and do these people who are bringing me in seem like someone I look up to or respect? And because that's like in a way like self assuring. I'm like, okay, these people are smart, or, and they like feel like okay bringing me in because in my interviews, whenever I'm talking to people, I'm very full throated and I just sort of like, kind of put myself entirely out there. And then that way I'm sort of showing to people that I'm interviewing with, like, this is me. You get what you see. And it kind of helps mitigate imposter syndrome because you're like, well, they've already seen you, that you've already shown yourself to them. And I think it's a way to kind of not feel like you have to sort of it's maybe it's easier said for others or easier said for me than others. I don't know, but I can't speak up for everybody. But it really is just like a matter of like trusting in some ways the people who brought you in, and then trusting yourself that like you're being as honest as you can with who you're working with. Um, yeah, and then know that everyone else suffers from imposter syndrome too. Like by fact of calling it imposter syndrome, it kind of makes the sense that like, hey, this is the thing. Like, don't worry.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone is in the dark hole routinely.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay if I am.
Yeah. Exactly.
On the flip
Yeah.
side of it, yeah. On the flip side of things, a lot of the founder community watch these videos, right? Something I'm sure that's on their mind is like, how do you foster a high performance, like a high octane environment without putting pressure that actually inhibits the creativity, inhibits the design process? You know, how do you create that healthy environment?
Good question. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I wish I had answered all of those things, but I mean, there's a couple of things. When you talk about founders, I'm assuming like, let's maybe say like smaller
Yeah,
scale
smaller
teams
teams.
or, whatever. But yeah, right. Like for me, it's like, okay, so I think it's gotten a little harder in recent years with work from home being so prevalent. I really think like one of those core things that somebody should strive for and starting is like an in-person collaboration as much as possible, right? Like you're already trying to break down these barriers of working together. And while I know it's not as easily like sort of done these days, I think it's worth, I really think it's worth like making that time and that commitment because A, the process of working together is just going to be more fun, which I think is the end goal. But two, it's going to show these, your design team or people you're working with that like, you're there and like you care and that it's like even more so. I think designers like really want to be involved in more things than just sort of the design silo. I think especially what we've seen where just like in recent, this past year with all these layoffs, like there's this strive for like kind of getting back to like focusing on things that, really matter or deliver. And I think designers really want to know what those things are. I mean, I've been in the position where I've seen on one side, the stakeholders are worried about, cost centers or profit and loss, and knowing that like some initiatives might be sort of, dwindling or rising. And then I've seen at the same time, designers, working on like swag websites. And in my mind, that's like there's nothing wrong with either party there. I just think it's like a miscommunication of priorities. And I think, designers don't just have to work on shiny things. Like I think they're happy to solve ugly, boring, complex problems. You just got to put those problems in front of designers, or involve them in that. That's what makes me excited. At least that's like how that's what motivates me. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious now. Going back then to like thinking about the answer to that question. Like, what year did you join Uber? Like, when was your tenure at Uber?
I had probably the 3.5 most interesting years at Uber one could have. I joined in 2015
Oh,
during the sort of hypergrowth era.
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, there was the trip to Vegas, I think as people are, familiar with. Then
But you were there for X.
2016, I was there for that. I'm not going to tell stories though. So, but I was there for that. And as somebody early, yeah, and like at that point though, I will say that was this like, I was newish to tech. And it was that sort of kind of the opposite moment of right now, frankly. It was just sort of like everything was exploding and it was exciting. And I was sort of like, whoa. Um, so I was there for that, and then I went through, the 2016, 2017, the real like kind of ugly years of press and sort of that, what happened with Uber. And then, I left 2018, in September, August, I kind of forget, sort of towards the end of that. So I saw a lot at Uber. Like I mentioned, safety maps. I was working on self-driving. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And the reason I asked that in relation to like your the what you're talking about of like the organization's priorities and also like ugly boring problems, right? Is like, you know,
which are oftentimes the best problems with
yeah,
designers,
yeah,
most fulfilling.
right. Well, the reason I asked that is that
Yeah.
like yeah, during that stretch of like Uber's hyper growth, I imagine like at least this is like the outside conception is like you hear these press reports about like oh this like terrible thing happened to this rider in India and like the whole city shut down from like strikes and protests or what have you like what was it like while they were in their sort of very famous notorious move fast and break things era you being working on design for what almost is like a little bit of like a handbrake, no pun for like the car company, right? But like working in like the capacity, right? Like which I
Dad
imagine,
jokes, get your
yeah,
dad jokes in.
yeah,
Yeah.
is like more of like a friction introduction rather than like I think a lot of design mentality, especially at that time, was about optimizing for conversion, eliminating friction.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And a lot of things, many things at that time were sort of out of my control. There's something they teach you at Apple. It's sort of like things that you can influence, things that you can control, things that you can't influence, things that you can't. I couldn't control or influence Uber's higher level priorities around safety, but I could, we could respond to it. And I was a more junior designer at that time. Um, but as those safety, incidents would happen, and then there was ones that would make the news. Um, I think there was this understanding that happened where there's a lot of things I think that happened, but for me, it was like I saw there was okay, we're growing, but now that we're growing, there's this like higher level of responsibility around safety. And and trust, and how there wasn't like always a very clear cut solution for things, because, a lot of things had just been happening in, you know, taxis or transportation, but were now sort of just being made public because Uber was sort of under this microscope. And I'm not trying to defend either of it, but it meant like being more responsible, like responsive to things that were happening. In a way, it was good because it kind of like lit a fire to really focus on some of these features, ones that are still around today. I mean, the safety center stuff on the Rider app. I mean, that was like, there were many people who worked on that, but I remember, creating those mock-ups for what it meant for somebody who was in a car and wanted to hit it was the dial 911 button, and it would,
Wow.
just calling out these features of like, okay, well, what does somebody need in that moment? They probably want a discrete way to show, where they're at, what car they're in, button to call 911, sort of human readable street names, right? So it's sort of like knowing, hey, you're at the intersection of, 20th and Main Street or whatever, right? And like calling those things out. And so, it was an opportunity to like really dive deep into those things. But, obviously it was a little tough because so much of this hyper growth stuff was happening at Uber that I think the priorities would sort of shift all the time, right? It would be safety, and then it would be like, rider experience pickups or something.
So,
Yeah.
so actually, okay, that's a please, please speak more about like designing inside of a hyper growth organization that is rejiggering its priorities constantly, because of course they're doing whatever is the current most urgent task in order for the hyper growth flame to not go out, right? Like, what is it like designing in an organization like that?
Yeah.
And actually, kind of just to like dovetail that is like,
Yeah.
like how is it that you take accountability? How is it that you process even guilt for some of these stories in a hyper growth
Oh
environment?
yeah.
As one designer, right? Like we take on so much of these feelings from stories that we hear about. Like how do you deal with that? How do you process those?
Um, well, so there's an element to the first question, agree, of like, you have to understand that like the ship is going in a certain direction, and I think there's a real element of like designers. Um, I I don't know, like the probably like the one of the most real lessons I've learned is like you gotta be pragmatic in this industry,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean you're a bad person for ignoring, all these other use cases. But a mistake I often see is people trying to design for the 100% use case, right? Like 100% of users. Like I work in health, right? And like we want to help everybody, of course. But if you try to help everybody, you're not going to exist to the where you can help anybody. Does that make sense? Right? It's like you have to, if you're creating a health, tech service, you can't have, we're like, well, what about someone who doesn't have a smartphone? And like, that is a problem for sure. But like, are we capable of handling something like that? And you just have to like, you really have to just like, someone's got to speak up, and you have to kind of like call those things out. And then as a designer, I think for me, it was about working closely with my product peers, to understand like, hey, I have these ideas around safety. Here's things we should do, but really like in real like reality, like here's the things that we can or should accomplish. So it's about like when you join a firm, you're not just joining with starry eyes and saying we can accomplish anything. Like that's great, but you have to kind of know that like it's a business, and you got to sort of work with those things. And if things like safety weren't a priority to the point where it was like uncomfortable, then you need to make that clear, and by leaving or speaking up. But it's like there's a balance that you have to strike between like creating great experiences and understanding that like there's a lot of things that are you can't control or influence. So you have to sort of make a decision to be mindful about the choices you make and what you want to sort of push forward. And it doesn't mean you would never cover those things. It just sort of means in order to kind of keep moving forward, you have to kind of take these real steps. And then Harrison, to your point about, how do I feel and like respond to a lot of these things? I mean, it's not so much like I hopefully I've never created anything that like has caused guilt in a product feature, right? I mean, I think our goal as designers is to build things that try to alleviate that, right? Try to make those things better.
I don't
Um,
think for the record.
but you just again, it's
Yes. I don't think
what's
it
that?
has.
You don't
No.
think You're user hostile. Yeah, yeah, you're user hostile. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right. We're anti-patterns. It's there. I think there's a real element of accepting these things happen. In the real world, safety happens. And I worked on self-driving when the first car incident happened in Tempe for with the self-driving car, and I hadn't been on it that long at that point. But you sort of realize like the real world happens, and you can try to improve these things. But I mean, it's ultimately not always something you can. Again, you can't control a lot of these things. You can only sort of respond and try to make things better. So yeah, it's a touchy question in a way because it almost. I'm gonna ask you guys like it doesn't want to. I think there's this fine line that designers have to sort of strive between, like again trying to make the world better, but also like operating as if like we're in the real world. It's a business, and they're not always in conflict, but sometimes they aren't the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's like a problem that just have to like process as well. Like, there just kind of comes a point where you realize that no matter what business you're in the people business, and boy, are people messy. Boy, is the real world messy. So, like, even if you find yourself at a table where everybody has good intentions, it's totally possible that not everybody, when they get up and walks away, will feel good, right? And it's not as a result of any wrongdoing or anything like that. It's just, I mean, like the nature of things. And I think that like that kind of also, like when I think about some of the imposter syndrome that like I've experienced, maybe because just like a very high percentage of my career has been as a founder, and as a founder, a very high percentage of your time is going to be spent with things not working, right, rather than things actually working and you like soaring to the moon. I feel like actually a lot of my imposter syndrome has come.
I got 99 problem in a day of peace ain't one.
Yeah, exactly. That like a lot of like my imposter syndrome is not come from the place of like, wow, like things are going so well. Like, are you really as legit as this? It's more like, dude, holy shit, you messed up so badly. Like, like what? How can you make a mistake that big, right? And just coming to that place of acceptance of like humans make mistakes, right? And not just like us as humans, but like when we're working with other humans out in the real world, like the real world is largely constituted of just like flaws, accidents, what have you. Yeah, so I think that like that's really what you're saying resonates beyond even just design. I think to like, yeah,
Kind of just
Life, yeah. I mean, being
yeah,
Go on, Kyle. Go on, Kyle.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, approach everything in your work as just demonstrated integrity, right? It's like really, it's like such a good default, and doesn't mean to be it's like a stick in the mud, right? It's like just be the person who demonstrates integrity in everything you do, and I just don't think that's never failed me personally, and I highly like obviously in design and in life, I think that's like just highly valuable advice. So, Harrison, I stepped on you a bit, but please.
No, and there's just a bit of a lag, but I love that, and I was like, man, if that was just a little bit longer, that's definitely a reel right there.
yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to ask, tell us about a time when you had to balance ethical considerations with business goals, right? Like, how'd you navigate that situation? And you don't have to get into total specifics,
Yeah.
but
So
if you want to, you can.
no, I mean, I think like ethical. I've never like striven. There's never been like an occasion where I've had to do something that's ever felt like unethical in work. It's like it's like it's never like there's ethics around like should we do this or should we not. I mean, that kind of comes up sort of more clearly. But I do think I'll sort of return to this, but the it's sort of about being as like um, uh, addressing as much as you can without sacrificing like your ability to address anything at all. Back to what I was talking about with like, yeah, you want to provide healthcare to everybody, all these tech companies do, but if you sort of try to do that, you're really gonna like not be able to operate in a very like, clear way. So, I mean, I do have a hard time answering that question like in a specific sense, but I think how I've sort of worked through it with peers is trying to okay, I actually do have an example. So one time product, I sort of won't really name it. We were building something that was going to help people with a medical condition, and the product team, sort of like high level stakeholders had been doing a lot of brainstorming around things. And one of the cool things they come up with was this idea of like, oh, let's have an easy button for medication refill. Great idea, right? We're helping somebody treat some condition. We'll also have a way for them to press a button and get their meds. And this is one of those like areas that there's entire companies that exist, Alto, to do all these things. But you really, the way I approached that was I sort of, well, first we kind of kicked the can down the road for a little bit. We're like, that sounds cool, but maybe we won't do it if it goes away, because it's a huge ask. What I sort of did was like, okay, if this place that I'm at working on this thing and we're building this, we're gonna, enable people to sort of actually receive a medication. There's a lot that comes with that. It's not just a button. It's, you have to know that you're getting the right medication, that it's in the correct quantity, that you have refills, that you can track it, that if you don't receive it, you have ways to, it's sort of this whole ecosystem of things. And in this case, it was like, yeah, it was being a bit of a stick in the mud, but if you're going to give somebody something that could affect their life in a way, and they're going to rely on, you can't just do like the cool button thing. You have to kind of take on a lot of responsibility within there.
Yeah, it's like, what does this shiny, like, diffuse button do with a nice animation? Well, it may give you a heart attack, for starters.
No, I mean, the second you said that sounds like a good idea, immediately what started happening in my mind is like, I started red teaming it and being like, okay, imagine like a Xanax prescription or like some other, what have you. And I'm just like, like, like speed pressing it. And like, it's some of the stuff you're talking about. It's like the ethical stuff bubbles up into like very concrete legal stuff, regulatory stuff, criminal stuff. I mean, you're in health, so like
it gets criminal really quickly.
It does for sure. I mean, we don't not need to name any names, but I think us who have like emails coming into our inbox of the latest tech news can think of some examples of like companies that sort of like, the DOJ and the FDA right now are like, I wonder if you guys were violating the Controlled Substances Act, because like, during COVID, like some of them, they're now being like investigated as pill mills, because I think that this rolls all the way back to, I think, some design questions, right? Which is just like, did they have like thoughtful frictions introduced in place, or did they see like the world as it was constructed as just like, oh, this is the nemesis of what we're trying to do because it obstructs like somebody from being able to get a Schedule II controlled substance in their like, mailbox after a 5-minute Zoom call, right? Like, yeah, it just like I think that very much resonated. Like,
it takes a real willful. Yeah, I mean, it takes a real. I can't comment on those companies or places, but it's like it's super clear when human behavior. If someone like
Amazon
can find a loophole here. If someone can exploit a loophole for these things, like they're going to, and it's in a way, it's like by creating low friction, you're sort of introducing a dark pattern, I guess, in a weird way. That's like you sort of like you making it easier for somebody to get a medication that they probably need someone more professional to sort of be managing. But yeah, it's like even beyond even for somebody who's just getting a regular, whatever, like antibiotics or something, they might rely on those things. And again, it's like, if you've ordered a medication or if you've ever stood in line at a Walgreens and you've seen somebody have a way too long conversation, it's always these things around insurance says it's not approved for this thing or all of these things in life. And you just like, I think it's like you gotta be kind of willing to commit to these things, right? It's like, you listen it, you sort of like try to like listen to like the problem is, you sort of like try to challenge the space, and then like when you decide you commit, you actually try to make that that thing actually work well. But it's like, if you can't really commit to certain areas, then you have no business being in that area, and that's okay too. That's one less thing for you to do. You don't have to do it.
Right. That's
So,
I mean,
yeah.
think that we try to like hammer into any founder that we talk to. It's just like, if you're frazzled right now about like how much you got to ship, maybe you should be shipping less. Maybe you should be committing to less.
Yeah, 1,000 no's for every one yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. And
for sure.
okay,
It's a gift. It's a real gift.
I wanted to ask actually before we conclude, I wanted to ask because you've brought it up a couple times now, in passing, this Apple framework of things you can influence, things you can control. Like, are you allowed to like share at all like how they sort of like thought about this stuff or how they would educate designers into thinking about this stuff?
I can't. I alluded maybe to it, but it's what I'll say is it's um, the way Apple approached, the way they build these things is like anything. It's very thoughtful, and I think it speaks to like true like they make their values clear, right? And um, just like where Apple makes its values clear and communicates them and lives them every day, I think something that companies and founders can learn is that it's not about like a slogan that sounds nice and some t-shirts and like posters on the wall and saying you're design led. It's like you're really embodying what these values are. And so places that aren't Apple don't have to be Apple, but they can really still like take a lot of these, sit down with the people you're building with and think about like what it really means to build something. And when you create, company tenets or values or mission objectives, make them pretty concrete, really make them like something that makes sense to people. I mean, I think because that's how people practice every day. And ultimately, I think that's much easier to say than like, hey, we're some company and we're going to like make this the best healthcare product in the world. Cool. But like, how do I live through that every day? And how do I embody that every day? And so like just when you're working with design teams or anybody, just try to think about these ways that you can have values and these like levers that you can kind of help people guide themselves on, that don't just sound nice, but are actually like very specific. I think that's just something that it's like too easily sort of like glossed over and really like, let's be specific about these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my pivot away from Apple there, but yeah, I hope I hope there's a life lesson in there somewhere.
Oh, there definitely is. I mean, I love the idea of like, I mean, I that's going to be a reel for sure. It's like this idea of like, you know, control, influence, like don't beat yourself up if you don't have it in that moment. Just focus on like your locus of control. Like in these environments, design as a discipline can be quite intimidating to founding teams, to startups. Really, even if you're in a small team that doesn't really practice the discipline, it can be intimidating. Even at a large company that maybe has it in a different department. Like, what advice might you have for founders or people managing teams that have no design sensibility or no design experience or no experience in the discipline whatsoever? Like, what do you say to them? Like, why is it important? Like, how do you jumpstart them? What direction are you pointing them in?
I think I'm always trying to point them in the direction of the individual contributors, the people who are actually working on things, to break down the sort of like barriers of middle management, not to kind of call people out who feel this need to protect designers, which I think is like a real, I mean, it's just gating straight up, right? It's just not like, I don't think it makes sense. I think people are smart. They can sort of make these decisions for themselves. And so if you're these founders, especially against smaller, maybe whatever size teams, like bring your individual contributors into the loop, like educate them, make them part of the process. It doesn't mean that you have to pivot on every single thing that they sort of say or respond to, but I think it's like what you're doing is you're sort of, the product or service that you're building is a larger, it's probably large and complex, and you've got big ambitious goals, and you might not even know where to relegate quote design to. You might just think about that as like, oh, it's just our website, right? Like actually you should be thinking about like how can be design sort of be spread throughout the system and services of things that you're working on. So really just break down the barriers, involve people, and yeah, everyone hates more meetings, but like I think frankly, like designers and being part of like some of those boring meetings is good, you know, bring them in, loop them in. Um, and just don't gate them. Don't sort of like
Yeah.
funnel that feedback through somebody else. I mean, maybe this goes against every management book that's ever been written about design. I don't know. I don't really read those books, but the point is like, I don't know. As an IC, I've just always wanted to be, I always push to be in those like meetings. And most of the time I don't say anything, but I guarantee 100% of the times I learn something
When does
that affects my sort of day-to-day
building,
work.
when does context building become a waste of time or kind of like get into that bullshit territory?
Context building. You mean like,
Like
I mean, if you're like sort of just, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're just, I think there's like a tendency to like want to think too much before actually like starting to ship or put work out there. Like I think there's a lot of great lessons and sprints and sticky boards and these exercises, but it can get a little like, I don't know. I use this term not very kindly, but it can be like design camp sometimes. Like, hey, we're like doing these exercises, and those are valuable things to do, absolutely. But like, you know, sometimes you just got to read the room, and just you don't need to create all this process around things. Just really start working. And I think it's like, you know, you're going to get a lot of stuff wrong, but by the process of putting things out there and working closely with, you know, engineers and product managers, like you're still like actually arriving at something together rather than, okay, the design team went and did a sprint and they did it by the book and they came up with this. I think design is just way messier than that. Like, it's just like, I don't know. I can't follow any design process. So like, for me, it's just always chaos. I embrace the chaos because I don't know, it's part of the fun. And so when that context setting becomes bullshit is when it's like, there's just so much context and no actual like real agreement and things being put together. And you kind of tend to like spiral your thoughts into sort of something that might be the solution, but probably, you know, took a little too long to get there if you know, ask me. And then you're sort of protective of it, which is even worse.
Yeah.
The best thing is to put stuff out there. It's wrong. And then you just, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it's great to not be protective of your work.
This is one of the most like subtle things that you start to notice after like a lot of work or like seeing a lot of designers work, is that like those detailed portfolio pieces can be really helpful. The same way like it's kind of like in the detail you're forced to communicate as the designer, like whether you're describing, like you're using the process to describe the mess that actually happened, which is a good thing, I think, because like you said, the design process is pretty non-deterministic. There's a lot of chaos and entropy in it, that you're actually pulling order from the chaos. Whereas if you're like very process adherent, it kind of shows up in like the portfolio piece or like the work that it's like, oh wow, you're literally describing this like as if it's a recipe. And it's never a recipe, right?
Yeah. No. It's chaos. It's like baking versus like cooking with what you have in the fridge. I mean, I can bake to a decent level and I can cook following a recipe to a decent level, but I have so much more fun just being like, here's what I got. I'm going to be creative and put something together. And I just think that's like, I don't know, you embrace that and you're kind of more free as to.
Yeah.
Are you a baker or cook here? Is that, oh, right on. Nice.
No. Yes. I order my shit off a Factor because I'm proudfully negligent, inept, bad, like unaware in the kitchen, you know. So the way I design my food intake is to get people better than myself to make it for me in a prepackaged way.
Oh, yeah, Kyle. So like Harrison and I lived together in an apartment that was largely unfurnished for 2 years in Nairobi. During our Africa phase.
Cool.
There's still a pitch deck floating around somewhere that like the team slide, and this is actually a testament to Harrison maybe underselling himself here. The team slide is just a photo of me and Harrison pointing at a rice pilau that we managed to get like the flip just right, so it came out like with like a clean trim crust.
million.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah,
You know, we had
yeah.
our
Like
first million.
like a
Yes, sir.
gelatin mold off of better. Yeah. I mean, I would probably keep that as like a highlight photo. I mean, that again, it's like I was saying, like the gelatin mold on Great British Bake Off. It's just like so perfect that you're like can't even eat this thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, that's so
Exactly.
great.
I think that's all the time we have. Kyle, thank you so much, man. I think Kyle, you are a designer's designer, right?
Truly.
Like you are, you embody everything that
Oh,
I think a designer, like an upcoming senior, is looking at as like, hey, this is the next gen. This guy has the characteristics, right? Thank you so much, really. Like we've learned so much. I hope our viewers, I know our viewers are going to learn a lot. Founders, designer community. Um, thank you, really, from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Yeah, this was a great conversation.
All right.
yeah. Thank you guys. This was great, and for the chance to be on this together and to share and yeah, thank you so much, and for the kind words and everything.
Amazing.
So,
Awesome. Well, we'll see you guys next episode. That was Kyle DeHovitz, everybody.
I'm Harrison Tellion.
I'm Agree Ahmed.
See you guys.